Welcome back to another edition of Coffee Convo with Ak. I hope you guys enjoyed the debut last week. If you did, make sure you like, subscribe, and if you want more than one episode a week, which is what I promise, if enough people ask for more, maybe I'll give you guys 2 a week. And it was a hot topic last week, and we're going to try to bring you another one today. So recently, Barack and I, we created a pound-for-pound list that is on our social handles along with Overtime Boxing. We do it roughly every 3 months, especially when big fights happen. Obviously, that's a subjective list. A lot of folks aren't going to agree with it. But most of the same guys aren't on everybody's list. But the one, I guess, feedback that we received the most, the negative feedback, was Gervonta Davis being behind Shakur Stevenson. So I'm going to break that down on. But first, I want to, for those that maybe aren't familiar with the criteria for pound for the top fighters in the world, I'm going to break it down for you guys. Now, this is the criteria that has always been in place, but this is still subjective. Remember, this is opinion-based. But there are a few things that play a part in picking this list. Now, one of the things that plays the least amount is what have you done throughout your career, right, for the last 4 or 5 years. Now, that plays a part. I mean, it's still in the back of your mind when a fighter has accomplished a lot. So that kind of has a sway, little influence, but that also has a stature of limitations. So, you know, for example, Tyson Fury beating Klitschko when he did, obviously that's a done deal in terms of using that to be pound for pound. Is mainly what have you done lately, and not necessarily just 1 year, but, you know, in the last couple of years, I would say. Now, here are the factors, and I don't want to speak for Barack. This is my opinion because, you know, disclaimer, Barack and I don't always agree on every single name on that list. Most of them, yes, but not every name, especially when it comes to the number 8, 9, and 10. We did agree on this list, and we compromised. But here's my criteria on how I pick the best fighters in the world, pound for pound. The number one thing is winning, right? Winning. But I add to that, how you win is what really puts you at the top, in my opinion, in terms of dominance. And that doesn't necessarily mean knocking a fighter out. If you're winning most of the rounds in a fight, I'm talking about dominating a fight, 10 rounds to 2, 11 to 1, that's still dominance, which Shakur has done often. And Terrace Crawford, stopping guys. Yes, he didn't stop Majormore, but in my opinion, he won 8 rounds to 4. So let's get back to the criteria. Winning, dominance, right? Skill set, the way you box, ring generalship, the way you control a fight, defensively, mixing defense and offense, like how you control a bout, ring distance, ring generalship, as I mentioned, just winning the fights. But obviously, the opponents that you beat play a major part. The accolades, the hardware that you obtain during your reign plays a part, especially as of late. So remember the criteria, folks. It's not about who's the most popular fighter in the world. It's not only about what the casual fans or, you know, fans that only watch the big fights, who they think is great or who's the most exciting fighter, because those things play a little part, but it's about who you beat, right? And how often you fight, in my opinion, again. So here's the criteria: winning, dominance, skill set, hardware, level of opponents, and lastly, moving into different divisions. You have to consider a guy that started somewhere and is 2 or 3 divisions from where he started. Those all play a part, but also has a lot to do with what have you done lately. So let's break down the one one of the things that I got the most feedback on was Shakur and Tank Davis. Just to let it be known, Tank is a fighter that Barack and I have supported throughout our whole career, even when he was getting a lot of hate. We've gone back and forth with other pundits about him being on a path for pound list. So Tank is one of my favorite fighters in the world. Very skilled. In terms of skill set, he might be top 3. Very skilled fighter. But obviously, there are other major factors that play a part in picking the best fighters in the world. He is definitely one of the most exciting and very talented fighter, and that's why we have him on our list. And the reason we have Shakur over him is because of what they've done in the last couple of years. And just to break a few things down, the last couple of years, 2.5 years or so, Shakur has unified the division and beaten in 2022, beating Oscar Valdez. And also, after that, having 4 big wins. He beat Cansaciao, who's an Olympic medalist, who's a very skilled fighter. And he's won his fights, whether you're entertained or not. He won his fights convincingly. There's no question about those wins. So I call that dominance. And De Los Santos, he arguably fought with one hand and still won that fight clearly. So when you talk about the level of opponents and the, what he achieved and with the Cansaciao fight, he obviously won a vacant WBC world title. Was vacant, still a world title nevertheless, in a 135-pound division. So we have to consider all of those things. Now, I'm not saying that Tank hasn't had a couple of big wins, but when you compare the opponents and what was achieved, obviously that there's a disparity there. So I'll say this. I give Tank credit for the Ryan Garcia win, but obviously there's an asterisk to that win because of the weight clause on Ryan Garcia. And yes, Ryan is way bigger than Tank, so I could understand why his team would want to try to get some advantage. That's what this sport is about. So I'll say the win was a big win. Maybe it wasn't the best Ryan Garcia. Maybe Tank still beats Ryan at another weight class. We won't know unless they fight again. But that was a big win. But Ryan, to that point, hadn't fought any elite fighter outside of Luke Campbell, which was a big win. And he beat Fortuna in dramatic fashion, but Fortuna seemed like it was a shell of himself. And this is not taken away from Ryan. Those are big wins. But to that point, when he fought Tank, he hadn't been in there with an elite fighter, and that fight wasn't for a world title. So how much credit would you give Tank for that fight? Plenty, but it doesn't compare to some of Shakur's wins. And obviously, Tank beat Frank Martin, and he stopped him, which was a dramatic win. Frank Martin is an overachiever. A young man that started boxing late in his career. Wasn't a decorated amateur, but he's done enough, and he was undefeated at the time. So credit to Tank for that win. But those are the biggest wins in the last couple of years for Tank. And we all want to see Tank against the elite guys, the Teofimos of the world, the Shakurs, obviously, even Lomachenko. And this is not saying that he doesn't want those fights. Obviously, this is a business. So we don't know why those fights aren't happening, but they haven't happened yet. And again, with this list, it can change so quickly with a couple of guys winning, a couple of guys losing. So so many guys are interchangeable, especially in the last few spots. I mean, when you talk about number 10, we have Teofimo on the number 10 spot because we feel in the last couple of years he's had bigger wins than the other guys in championship fights and defending this title. When you talk about David Benavidez, one of the most exciting fighters in the sport. So he could be at number 10. Those guys at number 11, number 12, 13, there's so many. Devin Haney also has an argument for that spot. Some people even have him lower because obviously he only has a loss against Ryan Garcia, and obviously because of the controversy, there's some question marks there. Now, maybe Ryan still beats him with no issues, but at this point, my point is that there are a lot of guys that could have an argument to be on this list. I'm going to go back to the number one spot talk because I did see a lot of comments and read a lot of comments, which, I didn't think it was even questionable off for argument, but a lot of people have Usyk over Crawford, which I don't understand because credit to Usyk for beating Fury. Fury's massive skill. That was a big win, but that was a very, very close fight. It wasn't a dominating performance. A lot of folks felt that Fury won the fight. Credit to Usyk. It could have went either way. He got the nod. It's a big win, but it wasn't dominating. And even in the heavyweight division, Usyk really hasn't dominated. He has big wins, 2 big wins over AJ. Second fight was closer, but before that, he stopped guys, but he struggled a bit. Crawford hasn't struggled in any of his big fights. Obviously, not the Magic War fight. The one before that, he fought one of the best fighters in the world, Spence, and obviously that was a dominating performance. I felt that he clearly beat Magimorph. Remember, that was another title in a different division at 154, a division that he hadn't been in. Usyk had already fought many times at heavyweight when he fought Fury. He was already at heavyweight. This was Terrace Crawford's first fight at 154 for a world title, and he fought a guy that many of you might have not known or been familiar with. Was a very skilled fighter, very decorated, a decorated amateur, and I'm pretty sure he's going to beat a lot of guys, in his career. So that's where I'm at with this in terms of the number one spot. Bud has dominated. Usyk hasn't dominated in his division, and he's been there for a while. Bam Rodriguez is one of the most exciting fighters in boxing. He's moved up and down in weight and has captured titles and is unified, and he's done it in dominating fashion. And we had to put Beterbiev above Bivol because he just beat him, but in my opinion, Bivol won that fight, but it was close. Could have went either way. No robbery there, but I did have Bivol winning. So I think that the takeaway here is that when the average person, I guess, that doesn't really dissects the sport, picks the top guys in the world, they're really not considering all of those factors. They're considering who they love to watch the most. And maybe they're considering some knockout performances. Now, in a way, obviously he's higher on the list because he's an exciting fighter, but he's moved up in so many weight classes, and he has dominated. I wouldn't say all of his opponents are elite or high level, but he still has fought some high level opponents and has won in dominating fashion, which is why he's high on the list. So I'm not going to get into every single person on the list. I wanted to just break down a few of the topics that I was getting a lot of feedback for, and that was Tank being behind Shakur. I gave my opinion on why, level of opponents, what was accomplished within the last couple of years, and the fights. Now, they both are dominating performances. Tank is stopping guys. Shakur is sweeping guys, 11 rounds to 1, 10-2, those type of performances. But I'm going to give the nod to the guy who's faced better opposition. But we would love to see Tank versus, obviously, Shakur, and that's going to change a lot of things. I think all of these guys are going to end up in the first few spots in the next coming years. Once, Bud retires and Usyk retires, a lot is going to change in the sport. So very hard to make a pound-for-pound list. It's not easy at all. But always take into consideration dominance, the level of opponents, skill set, moving up in weight classes and hardware. And don't think about what a guy did 5 or 6 years ago. There's a statute of limitations for that. You have to think about what have you done for me lately. I go back at least 2 years or so to make those decisions. So just me breaking down why we chose this pound-for-pound list. And if you guys want to see it, you can go to our social media page, Boxing with Ak, also Barack's a Boxing Bully and Overtime Boxing And you can catch us calling fights on Overtime November 22nd, and also doing some work on some broadcasts with the Zone, and Ring Champs is coming soon with myself and Barack. But I'll give you guys another episode next week. If you want more than one episode a week, make sure you leave that in the comments. I do go through the comments, and I'm going to be giving some giveaways soon. So make sure you like and subscribe. And that's it for today. Peace and love. Stay safe. I'll catch you in about a week or so.